Tonight, more search powers for police as new Wondering laws are passed. Welcome to ABC News Queensland. I'm Jessica Van Vonderen. Major reform to aged care stalls despite months of talks. Meet the Brisbane hairstylists trying to change industry stereotypes. And Ron Coote welcomed into the NRL's Immortals Club. Good evening. Moments ago, State Parliament passed laws expanding extraordinary search powers for Queensland Police. Officers will be able to randomly search people for weapons in places like shopping centres and sporting venues. It's part of a suite of changes designed to improve community safety.
A grieving daughter still struggling to comprehend why.
Heartbreak beyond imagination. It's torn the family apart.
Her mother, Vilene White, was allegedly murdered by a teenage boy in an Ipswich shopping centre car park in February. The stabbing shocked the community and triggered a police request to extend stop and search powers. Calls which only grew after the Bondi Junction attack.
That was already a compelling argument, but clearly the events of the weekend make it even more compelling.
Already, police are allowed to use handheld metal detectors to scan people in nightclub precincts and on public transport. Now, under new laws that have passed State Parliament, the trial will be expanded to shopping centres, convenience stores, sporting and entertainment venues and licensed premises.
This should have just been like an automatic mandate.
But advocates have expressed concerns.
The ability of us to search someone without a warrant is a significant step. But it's one that we do not take lightly. There are safeguards with it.
Figures from the Queensland Police show up to the end of May, more than 500 weapons were seized during Wondering. But of the total charges laid, almost half were for drugs, compared to 17% for weapons.
That is police doing their job and detecting offences.
Other law changes include greater access for victims of crime and media to children's court matters, replacing the wording of detention as a last resort in the Youth Justice Act.
Labor are fence-sitting when it comes to tackling youth crime and tinkering around the edges.
Social media companies could also be fined for not removing online content depicting youth offending.
These are sweeping law changes, but on the final day of the second last sitting week before the election, MPs only had about 3 hours for debate before it passed. A relatively short time for such a key issue. Kate McKenna, ABC News.
The federal government insists it's on the cusp of unveiling major reforms to aged care. But with politicians departing Canberra for another 2 weeks, the sector's bitterly disappointed the new laws haven't been revealed. As the government prepares to ask older Australians to pay more for care, it's introduced laws to pay superannuation to mums and dads on paid parental leave.
Hey, show us your T-Rex face. Perfect.
The People's Parliament becomes a playground.
Oh, yeah.
The federal government introducing new laws to add super to government-funded paid parental leave from next July, a move Labor says will substantially help women when they retire.
Women shouldn't pay an additional financial penalty just because they're taking time out to do important work like this.
But much like being left hanging for a high five,
knuckles, high fives.
The government is still yet to get an official sign-off from the opposition on a deal to reform aged care.
We'll have more to say about that subsequently.
There were areas that needed improvement and our Shadow Minister has done an outstanding job to date to seek some concessions.
The two sides have been in talks for months, striving for agreement behind closed doors to get older Australians to pay more for aged care.
Business as usual won't cut it in aged care in the coming decades.
The ABC understands there'll be no criminal penalties for providers who breach standards, and those who can afford it will pay more for residential and home care. But with the finer details still under wraps, the sector's concerned.
More could be a little bit, or it could be a lot. The uncertainty is going to cause anxiety.
The two major parties see bipartisanship on aged care as crucial to limit voter blowback. But nursing homes and those who represent older Australians are fed up with the delays. They'd been desperate for the new Aged Care Act to be introduced here in Parliament this past fortnight.
We now run the risk of not having enough time for older Australians to have their say in a Senate inquiry, or not getting it passed by the end of the year.
Changes are meant to be in effect mid-next year, and more than 3 years on from the Royal Commission, there's a sense older Australians have waited long enough. Evelyn Manfield, ABC News, Canberra.
The Coalition has backed a major overhaul to the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which passed Parliament today without support from the Greens. The changes are intended to slow the ballooning cost of the scheme. The bill is a major win for Labor, which managed to broker a deal with state and territory leaders and the Coalition after months of tension. Former NDIS Minister Linda Reynolds and her Liberal colleague Maria Kovacic both abstained from voting in the Senate, while the Greens accused the government of failing to consult the disability sector and described the projected savings as a betrayal to the community.
This has been a nervous time when you hear elements of your life discussed in Canberra. It can create a lot of anxiety. It wasn't that long ago that we didn't have an NDIS, and I think that, well, for me, we will never go back to that space, ever. The pathway forwards is with disabled people.
Australia will spend hundreds of millions of dollars on building a new factory that will manufacture and service long-range strike missiles. The government has announced Norwegian defence company Kongsberg will soon produce its naval strike and joint strike missiles at a facility in the Newcastle Airport precinct. Last month, the Australian Navy successfully test-fired an NSM for the first time.
This investment is about keeping Australians safe in an uncertain global environment, creating local jobs and supporting a future made in Australia.
A worker has died after a collision between two vehicles at a central Queensland coal mine. Emergency services were called to the Byerwen site in the Bowen Basin this afternoon to reports of a person suffering critical injuries. They were declared dead at the scene. It's the second fatality at the site in less than 3 weeks, with a 48-year-old worker killed after being struck by a crane earlier this month. One of the teenagers who killed 15-year-old Angus Beaumont has been charged with attempted murder while on bail for other offences. The 19-year-old man was released from detention in February after being sentenced in the Supreme Court over his role in the death of the teenager in Redcliffe in March 2020. He was arrested 3 months later and charged with multiple break and enters. The man now faces fresh charges, including attempted murder, after he and 2 others allegedly broke into a home and fired a handgun at another man. The trio were remanded in custody and will return to court next month. Fertility service Monash IVF has agreed to pay out more than $50 million in a class action settlement brought by more than 700 patients. It was accused of using inaccurate genetic testing and destroying potentially viable embryos.
5 years ago, Danielle Bopping wanted to grow her own family. She turned to IVF, but says her dreams for a child were dashed.
We don't choose to do IVF unless we have to, and we have no choice but to trust the medical professionals.
Miss Bopping gave her last remaining embryo to Monash IVF for testing, but the results showed the embryo wasn't viable. It later emerged the company's new non-invasive testing method was inaccurate, and a decision to discard the embryo may have been a tragic mistake.
I was angry, I was hurt, I was confused. I just kept questioning, like, how could this happen?
Miss Bopping wasn't the only one, and more than 700 women from around the country took the company to court. Today, it agreed to a $56 million settlement.
This has had real, lasting, devastating impacts on people's mental health.
The women also alleged Monash IVF destroyed embryos without consent, that signatures had been forged, and that one scientist burned documents.
It is not okay in the name of scientific innovation to use clients, paying clients and patients as guinea pigs.
As part of its settlement, Monash IVF has made no admissions of liability. In a statement it said, "We acknowledge this case has been challenging for many people and we regret any distress or hurt that may have been experienced." The company has stopped using the embryo testing method at the centre of the case. The next step is for the Supreme Court to approve the settlement, and that could be a complicated process given the amount of money and people involved, and deductions will also need to be made for legal fees.
There is a sense of closure, although it can never take away the pain and the trauma that so many of us have felt, but that hopefully it allows us to move forward.
Christian Silva, ABC News.
For people with afro-textured hair, finding a hairdresser with the right expertise can be a challenge. While many salons only specialise in looser textures, some stylists are calling for more hairdressers to learn the skill.
Patch Dionisio is a specialist in the hairdressing trade. She's a coily hair expert.
What are we gonna do today?
And refine.
Born and raised in Brazil, she moved to the city late last year where she found a gap in the hairdressing industry.
When I got here, it was so easy to find a job because they don't have like hairdressers with the knowledge to do our type of hairs.
Experts say the reason why salons don't cater to textured hair is due to a lack of education.
For some of the stylists out there, we simply don't get the practice, the experience, nor do we have the confidence to do that kind of hair.
Now salons are taking matters into their own hands, ditching the flawed training courses and using their time and money to train their stylists to do all types of hair, regardless of how coily it is. The owners of Ella and Jade Salon spent thousands in providing in-house training to their apprentices, so they know how to cut and style afro-textured hair. Director Alana Reid says the approach guarantees all their clients are catered for.
We don't have textured hair ourselves, so for clients to come in and actually trust us, we've had to really build that to get to a point where we are servicing texture every day.
Actress Perry Mooney says it took some convincing to try out the salon, but she now feels she's in good hands.
You not sense the stress from the hairdresser that's looking after you. That they're like, oh, I've not really dealt with this before, I don't know how to handle it. Like, being able to sit here and go, I'm all right, is like a massive thing.
Experts say new training packages will soon roll out across the country, equipping stylists with up-to-date training to ensure everyone gets a good cut. Tatenda Chibika, ABC News, Brisbane.
Communications Minister Michelle Rowland has thanked outgoing ABC Managing Director David Anderson after he announced he'll be resigning. Mr Anderson will stay on in the role until a new Managing Director is appointed, possibly early next year. Chairman Kim Williams says the ABC has been a better place under Mr Anderson's leadership. All up, David Anderson has spent more than 3 decades at the ABC, nearly 6 years in his current role. Mr Anderson said the decision to leave was not an easy one, and he's still very much committed to the importance of the ABC to the nation.
Our journalists, our commitment to telling Australian stories, our commitment across regional, rural, remote Australia and increasing our numbers there. For everything that we've done over those 6 years, I'm quite proud of what the ABC's achieved.
American TV icon Oprah Winfrey has made another intervention into US politics, appearing at the Democratic National Convention in support of Kamala Harris. The star-studded third day also saw running mate Tim Walz formally accept the party's vice presidential nomination. North America correspondent Jade McMillan reports from Chicago.
Returning to the city where she made her name.
Let's all choose Kamala Harris!
Oprah Winfrey made a surprise appearance in Chicago to give the Vice President a high-profile boost.
We won't be set back, pushed back, bullied back, kicked back. We're not going back.
The celebrity cameos piled up on day 3 of the convention, with performances from John Legend and Stevie Wonder.
Are y'all ready? We must choose courage over complacency.
While a former president with star power sought to contrast his party's candidate with her opponent, Donald Trump.
Kamala Harris, for the people,
The other guy who's proved, even more than the first go-around, that he's about me, myself, and I.
But the night belonged to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
It's the honour of my life to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States.
The former school teacher and football coach catapulted onto the national stage as Kamala Harris's running mate.
We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team.
Just a few weeks ago, there wouldn't have been too many Americans outside Minnesota who knew anything about Tim Walz. This was his biggest opportunity yet to introduce himself to the public and try to convince voters to back the Harris-Walz ticket.
Honestly, he reminds us of our dads.
Shows humility, thoughtfulness, and a caring for human beings.
The party faithful has bought the sales pitch, but Tim Walz and Kamala Harris will need broader support if they're going to win. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Chicago.
Communities in southern Israel that were devastated during the October 7 Hamas attack plan to boycott a government memorial marking the first anniversary. Many residents of the small border town say they felt abandoned during and following the attack and will hold their own ceremonies instead. They've also accused the government of dragging its feet in ceasefire talks.
On the Gaza border, a respected grandfather and friend is lowered into the ground next to his son. Avraham Mundo was captured alive by Hamas militants on October 7, along with his wife, daughter and 9-year-old grandson. Those relatives were released after nearly 50 days in captivity, but Mr. Mundo was left behind.
Dear Father, you recovered from your injuries from the kidnapping, but were abandoned again and again by the Prime Minister.
Avraham Mundo was one of 6 Israeli hostages whose remains were recovered by the military from the Gazan city of Khan Yunis this week. It's likely at least one was killed by Israeli fire. Family and friends of the hostages say their government has failed them.
He would be here alive, wounded but alive.
I don't believe that they really want to bring them back.
Hamas is still believed to be holding 109 hostages. Israeli authorities estimate at least a third of them are dead.
It was here on the Gaza border that communities bore the brunt of the October the 7th attacks. Now their residents say they're going to boycott a planned government memorial service. They'd prefer the government spent its energy trying to save the hostages who are still inside Gaza rather than memorialising the events of that day.
In Gaza, the Palestinian Health Ministry says at least 50 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes over a 24-hour period. The Israeli military issued new evacuation orders, forcing Palestinians to move yet again. Waiting for a ceasefire, their misery made worse by successive displacements and disappointments. Eric Dworchak, ABC News on the Gaza border.
5 bodies have been recovered from the wreckage of a super yacht after it sank during a storm off the coast of Italy. Divers with the Italian Coast Guard retrieved the remains before transporting them to hospital for identification. 1 passenger is still missing. The luxury yacht was carrying 22 people, including British tech entrepreneur Mike Lynch. Australia relies on flowers grown on the other side of the world to fill our supermarket bouquets. But the pressure to provide the cheapest price at the checkout is costing those who can least afford it.
This is Lake Naivasha, known for its spectacular wildlife and wildly successful flower industry. Many of the world's supermarket blooms come from this region in Kenya.
You effectively get European summer 10 months of the year, so we've got a continuous vegetation period.
Australia imports around half of all sold flowers, especially popular varieties like roses. Kenya is one of our biggest suppliers. Here, the growing conditions are perfect and the stems are cheap.
For a 40 centimetre, we will get something in the region of 8 cents, 8 euro cents per stem.
Peter Zipari is trying to create a carbon-neutral rose, but his attempts to make a more environmentally friendly flower is not helping him to get a better price at auction.
It hasn't changed much over the last 20 years.
Peter's farm is fair trade certified and supports local schools and services, but some other growers across the country have been investigated by the Kenyan Human Rights Commission for poor conditions and pay.
The minimum wage in the sector is about 15,000 Kenya shillings, which should be about $113 US. And we have many farms that are paying way below the minimum wage. We have farms that are paying as low as $63.
Esther is a single mother who struggles to live on her flower farm wage.
We are not okay on the ground. We are very poor. We are very bad.
Buyers have an obligation. They have a responsibility to ensure that they source ethically produced flowers.
These flowers will be flown to shops near us, but at the till, it'll be hard to tell who picked them. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, Lake Naivasha.
To finance now, here's Alan Kohler.
Well, the winning streak is now 10 days old. Now, I don't know how many times that has happened in history, but it's not many. There was a 12-dayer in February 2016, so it's the first since then. But as this 30-day graph of the All Ordinaries Index shows, despite rising for 10 days in a row, it hasn't yet regained the record high reached at 1:30 p.m. on August the 1st. Today's rise was driven by some of the banks, tech stocks including WiseTech Global continuing its huge run, and mining stocks, because the iron ore prices stopped falling. In fact, it stopped falling the day after the government put out a statement saying it was falling, which was clearly a buy signal. Copper also rose while oil and gold fell. The US dollar went up a bit last night ahead of the speech by Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell at the Jackson Hole Symposium of Central Bankers that starts tonight, and the Aussie held firm at 67.4 US cents. The market is now expecting 4 US rate cuts by Christmas, with the Fed funds rate expected to come down by 1%. Any hint from the Fed chairman that that's not going to happen will be 6.5 on the Richter scale. If it does happen, and the Reserve Bank of Australia keeps talking and acting tough, then the Aussie dollar is heading higher. And finally, the American share market fell yesterday, so its streak was a measly 9, but it did go back up last night, taking Tokyo and Hong Kong with it. And that's finance.
Coming up on 7:30, the public housing allegedly neglected by the state and the people with nowhere to go.
I feel that I've been ignored and forgotten. They haven't done anything for my house.
Don't have a roof over your head?
Nothing, yeah.
I'm paying rent for the termites that live here.
Every house that we went into had a significant number of problems.
If I was a tenant in the city, those maintenance requests will be done like that.
The NRL has named its 14th Immortal of the Game. 6-time premiership winner Ron Coote will go down as one of rugby league's greatest players of all time.
Coote was a pioneering back row forward in the 1960s and 70s who knew how to win.
Back inside to Coote, and Coote will score. A try for Australia by lock forward Coote.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 14th Immortal is Ron Coote.
In a 14-year career, Coote won 6 premierships from 9 grand finals, including 4 with the Rabbitohs during their golden era, before his sensational defection to their arch-rivals Easts, where he won 2 more. His elevation to immortal status ends a 43-year wait.
I never thought I'd be crying when I was 80, but I am.
Rugby League Grand Finals used to be held here at the SCG, so it was only fitting that Ron Coote was immortalised at the place where he won 6 premierships. He joins greats like Clive Churchill, Herbert Daly Messenger and Mal Meninga. Modern icons were among the 11 male players who joined the Hall of Fame. And for the first time, 6 women were inducted. Trailblazers such as Katrina Fanning were recognised for breaking down barriers.
We all know how tough we did it then, what else it took for us to be able to play. So to be amongst this group is incredibly special.
Wayne Bennett also became a Hall of Famer, but the 7-time premiership winning master coach wasn't there, so a protege collected the award for him.
Yeah, he's a great man and just really pleased for him.
A special night celebrating the Giants who've shaped the game. Bindi Bryce, ABC News, Sydney.
After 5 months and the longest season of football since the league began, it all comes down to this weekend's matches in the final round of the AFL's home and away season. Sydney looks almost certain to be crowned the minor premier, but there's still plenty of movement left as clubs jostle for position.
With one round left to play, half of the spots in the top 8 are still up for grabs, and the final lineup could see hardly any footy played at the MCG in September, which besides the COVID years would be a rarity. From 5th through to 8th place, the Lions, Hawks, Dogs and Blues all just need one more win this weekend to secure a finals berth.
We've got a lot to work on, there's no doubt about that, but we feel like the crux of our game's in a really good spot at the moment, and apart from our inaccuracy, we're doing a lot right.
In 4th place, Geelong will be confident of beating West Coast to guarantee a top 4 finish and the double chance. In Launceston on Saturday, Hawthorn take on North Melbourne, and a loss there could leave them on shaky ground.
This is as good as an elimination final for the game we have. We don't want to put our season in anyone else's hands.
The Lions host Essendon on Saturday night, and a 3rd straight loss there would leave them with a nervous wait.
You're always going to have a stumble or two in this competition. We'll bounce back. We've been bouncing back all year.
Sunday is shaping up as a nail-biting finale. The Western Bulldogs take on the Giants in Ballarat, and then Carlton plays St Kilda at the Docklands. If the Dogs or the Blues lose, they could be overtaken by Fremantle, who are still able to scrape into the top 8 with a win against Port Adelaide in Perth. The race for the finals could all come down to the very last game of the home and away season. Erin Marsico-Vetere, ABC News.
Weather now with Jenny Woodward. And has there been any rain today, Jenny?
Oh, barely a millimetre, Jess. Hello, everyone. Sunny skies across most of the state today, following some early fog about the city and the southeast inland. Another hot day in the north with the figures well above average. Urandangi got to 37, while it was 35 in Normanton, 27 to 28 in Townsville and Cairns. While further south, it's getting hotter in the southwest, 33 for Birdsville and Bundaberg up to 27. 8 was the lowest in Clermont and Warwick. Currently it's 20 in the city and we hit 26 this afternoon with 29 in Ipswich and Gatton and a top of 27 in Gympie. Plenty of fog around again this morning, but that didn't stop Louise from taking an early bike ride at Chelmer. At Woody Point, Trevor spotted a gulp of cormorant sunning themselves on a sandbank. Graham was enjoying an expansive view over the water at Hamilton Island, and Bruce had a spectacular sunset at Wivenhoe Dam this evening. Well, on to the satellite, and very little cloud over Queensland. In spite of some cloud over New South Wales, there hasn't been much rain in there, but there are some scattered falls over in the west. So Perth is expecting quite a lot of shower and storm activity tomorrow, up to 15 millimetres. There's the chance of storms in Adelaide too, showers for Melbourne and Hobart, but Sydney mostly sunny, a top of 22 there, but very hot in the centre, 35 degrees expected in Alice Springs. Onto the chart, and the high over eastern Australia, bringing us the fine clear weather. There's a very weak trough moving over southern Queensland. It hasn't made the map, but it could trigger a couple of light showers tomorrow as the winds turn more southeasterly. We'll have fog coming through again in the morning south of Townsville, and that onshore flow bringing showers to the tropical coast and into the tablelands. Let's check our forecasts, and Innisfail could have 15 millimetres during the day, but only 1 or 2 millimetres in Cairns and Mareeba. Now there'll be some fog areas into the goldfields, but then a sunny day all the way across to the west, 36 for Normanton, 31 in Charters Towers. Temperatures still climbing over the southern and central interior. Birdsville's heading for 36 tomorrow, with 34 expected in Longreach, but some early fog areas expected over the Central Highlands. Mostly sunny in the southeast, although there could be some early fog about. Just the chance of a light shower on the coastal fringe, 23 for Toowoomba and 29 in Gayndah. In Brisbane, 26, 27 degrees, early fog and a partly cloudy day. There is the chance of a light shower, and we'll see 25 25 degrees on the Golden Sunshine Coast. On Moreton Bay, north-northwesterlies to 15 knots, but then they'll shift southeasterly in the middle of the day, picking up to 20 knots later. Sunny skies are back from Saturday and the temperatures will be climbing. Jess, we're looking at tops of 30 to 33 degrees by the weekend. I think it's time to pack away the winter woolies.
Oh, absolutely. It's so warm. Thanks, Jenny. That is ABC News to the moment. Thank you for your company. 7:30 now. Good night.
Good night.